The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a landscape of rust-colored rock and scrub brush that seemed to go on forever. In the summer of 1999, two brothers from Las Vegas decided to take a camping trip along the edges of the restricted military zone near Rachel, Nevada, the small town that had become famous for its proximity to the mysterious Area 51. Jake Brennan, 28, was a geological surveyor with a fascination for the desert's hidden beauty. His younger brother, Marcus, 24, worked as a mechanic and shared Jake's love for adventure and the open road. They left on July 15th with enough supplies for 5 days, planning to photograph the desert landscape and maybe catch a glimpse of the famous Black Mailbox where UFO enthusiasts gathered. Their mother, Linda Brennan, remembered hugging them goodbye at her modest home in the suburbs of Las Vegas, telling them to be careful and to call when they reached Rachel. But before we continue with this incredible story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring these remarkable true stories to light. The brothers never called. When they didn't return by July 21st as planned, Linda contacted the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Tom Whitmore took the missing persons report, noting that the Brennan brothers were experienced outdoorsmen who knew the desert well. A search was organized quickly, with volunteers from Rachel and nearby Alamo joining law enforcement to comb the remote areas where the brothers might have traveled. What searchers found 3 days into the investigation sent chills through everyone involved. The brothers' dark blue Ford Ranger was discovered approximately 18 miles from Rachel, parked on a dirt road that led toward the northern perimeter of the restricted zone. The truck was unlocked, keys still in the ignition. Inside, investigators found the brothers' wallets, identification, a half-empty cooler with melted ice, and camping gear that appeared untouched. What they didn't find was any sign of Jake or Marcus Brennan. The tire tracks around the vehicle showed the truck had been parked deliberately, not abandoned in distress. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing to suggest violence or an accident. But strangest of all were the footprints leading away from the truck. 2 sets of boot prints headed directly east, toward the restricted boundary, marked by warning signs every few hundred yards. The prints were deep and evenly spaced, suggesting the brothers had been walking with purpose, not running or stumbling. After roughly 300 yards, the footprints simply vanished in a rocky area, where the hard-packed desert floor revealed nothing. Search and rescue teams expanded their efforts, bringing in helicopters and trained tracking dogs. The dogs picked up the brothers' scent at the truck, but lost it at the exact same spot where the footprints disappeared. It was as if Jake and Marcus had simply ceased to exist at that precise location. The Air Force was contacted regarding the proximity to the restricted zone, but military officials stated that no civilians had been detained or encountered near the boundary during that time period. The perimeter security systems had detected no breaches. Linda Brennan became a fixture at the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, arriving every morning to ask if there was any news. She brought photographs of her sons, showing anyone who would look. Jake, with his dark hair and serious expression, always carrying a camera. Marcus, with his easy smile and sun-bleached hair, wearing the same worn leather jacket in nearly every picture. She told investigators about how close her sons were, how they'd grown even closer after their father died of cancer 5 years earlier. They did everything together, she said. They would never have just disappeared without telling her. As weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled. There were no ransom demands, no bodies, no further clues. The case attracted some media attention, particularly from outlets interested in Area 51 conspiracy theories, but these sensational angles provided no real leads. Linda hired a private investigator named Robert Hendricks, a former FBI agent who specialized in missing persons cases. Hendricks spent months retracing the brothers' steps, interviewing everyone from gas station attendants to fellow geology enthusiasts who might have encountered Jake. What Hendricks discovered was that Jake had been asking questions in the weeks before the trip. He'd been researching old mining operations in the Nevada desert, particularly abandoned sites from the 1950s and 1960s that had been swallowed up when the government expanded the restricted zone around Area 51. Jake had checked out books from the UNLV library about Nevada mining history and had made notes about something called the Groom Lake Extension, a series of tunnels and shafts that supposedly existed before the area became classified military property. One of Jake's co-workers, a surveyor named Dennis Ortiz, remembered a conversation from early July. Jake had been excited about finding references to an old geological survey from 1958 that mentioned unusual magnetic readings in the desert north of Groom Lake. He'd told Dennis he thought there might be undiscovered cave systems or mineral deposits that had been forgotten when the military took over the land. Marcus, always supportive of his brother's interests, had agreed to help explore the area, despite having no real interest in geology himself. This information suggested the brothers might have been searching for something specific, possibly an entrance to old mining tunnels or a cave system. But it didn't explain why they would have left their truck so completely or why there was no trace of them beyond that 300-yard point. Hendricks presented his findings to the sheriff's office and a second search was organized, this time focusing on any possible underground features in the area. Specialized ground-penetrating radar equipment was brought in, but the desert's rocky composition and the proximity to restricted military zones limited where they could search. By the end of 1999, the case had gone cold. The sheriff's office kept it open, but with no new leads, there was nothing to pursue. Linda refused to give up. She created flyers and posted them throughout Nevada and neighboring states. She started a small website, one of the early missing persons sites on the internet, sharing her son's story and begging for information. She received dozens of tips over the years, each one leading nowhere. People claimed to have seen the brothers in California, Arizona, Texas. Every lead was investigated and dismissed. Years passed with agonizing slowness. Linda's house became a shrine to her missing sons, their rooms preserved exactly as they'd left them. She celebrated their birthdays alone, placing candles on cakes that no one would eat. She attended support groups for families of missing persons, finding some comfort in shared grief, but never finding answers. The case became one of Nevada's enduring mysteries, occasionally mentioned in articles about strange disappearances near Area 51, but never solved. In 2015, 16 years after the disappearance, Linda was diagnosed with breast cancer. The illness was aggressive, and the treatments were brutal. Through it all, she maintained her vigil, updating her son's website from her hospital bed, refusing to give up hope even as her own health deteriorated. She told her oncologist, Dr. Patricia Vega, that she couldn't die without knowing what happened to Jake and Marcus. She needed to know if they'd suffered, if they'd thought of her at the end, if there had been an end at all. Dr. Vega, moved by Linda's determination, helped her record video messages for her sons, just in case they were somehow still alive and would one day return. In these videos, Linda talked about her life, about memories from their childhood, about how much she loved them and missed them. She forgave them if they'd run away for some reason. She forgave herself for not being able to find them. She asked them to forgive her if she wasn't there when they came home. Linda Brennan died in March 2017, 18 years after her sons disappeared. The case remained officially open, but was essentially forgotten by everyone except a small community of true crime enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists. Linda's modest estate was handled by her younger sister, Carol Jennings, who lived in Phoenix. Carol had watched her sister's anguish for nearly 2 decades, and had long ago accepted that her nephews were gone forever, probably died in the desert through some tragic accident that left no trace. But Carol couldn't bring herself to take down Linda's website. Something about shutting it down felt like a final betrayal of her sister's dedication. So the site remained online, a digital memorial to two brothers who had vanished into the Nevada desert and the mother who never stopped looking for them. The story might have ended there, forgotten except as a cautionary tale about the dangers of exploring near-restricted military zones. Then, in late 2024, everything changed. A geospatial analyst named Kevin Tran was working for a private satellite imaging company that had recently upgraded its resolution capabilities. Kevin's job involved processing and cataloging satellite images of remote areas, looking for changes that might indicate illegal mining, environmental damage, or unauthorized construction. He was reviewing historical imagery of Nevada, comparing shots from different years to track desert erosion patterns, when something unusual caught his eye. The images were from an area north of Rachel, Nevada, near the restricted zone boundary. Kevin was comparing shots from 1998, 2010 and 2024 when he noticed something that hadn't been visible in the older, lower-resolution images. In the 2024 high-resolution scan, there was a shadow, a perfectly rectangular shadow approximately 7 miles from where the Brennan brothers' truck had been found in 1999. The shadow suggested a structure or depression in the ground, something geometric and clearly not natural. Kevin might have dismissed it as an old building foundation or military installation remnant, but something about the shadow's location and the precisely straight lines bothered him. He enhanced the image, adjusting contrast and applying filters. What emerged made him lean closer to his screen. The shadow was roughly 12 feet by 8 feet, and there appeared to be some kind of disturbance in the surrounding soil, a subtle difference in color that suggested the ground had been disturbed relatively recently, within the past 25 years, based on desert weathering patterns. Intrigued, Kevin pulled up earlier satellite images from 1999, right around the time of the Brennan disappearance. The resolution was much poorer, but when he carefully compared the images, he could see that something had changed in that exact spot between July and August 1999. The shadow wasn't there in early July, but by September, there was a subtle darkening in that location, barely visible in the low-resolution imagery, but definitely present. Kevin spent his lunch break researching the area and stumbled across Linda Brennan's website, still online after all these years. He read the story of Jake and Marcus, saw the location where their truck had been found, and pulled up his satellite images again. The shadow was approximately 7 miles northeast of the truck's location, directly along the trajectory the brothers' footprints had been heading before they vanished. The timing matched perfectly. He knew he had to report this, but to whom? The case was 25 years old. He wasn't even sure if the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office still had records from 1999. After some consideration, he decided to contact the National Park Service, which had some jurisdiction over Bureau of Land Management property in the area, and he also reached out through Linda Brennan's website contact form, not knowing if anyone still monitored it. Carol Jennings received Kevin's email on a Tuesday afternoon in January 2025. She'd been checking her sister's website email maybe once a month, mostly deleting spam and conspiracy theory rants, but Kevin's message was different. It was professional, detailed, and included low-resolution images showing the shadow. Carol's hands shook as she read it. After all these years, could there actually be a real lead? She contacted the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office immediately. The deputy who answered had never heard of the Brennan case, but he promised to look into it. Carol also called Robert Hendricks, the private investigator her sister had hired decades ago. Hendricks, now in his 70s and long retired, was skeptical, but agreed to look at Kevin's findings. When he saw the satellite images and heard the location, he went quiet for a long moment. "That's exactly where Jake was researching," Hendricks finally said. "Those old mining tunnel references he'd found. If there's a structure there now that wasn't there before July 1999, we need to get out there immediately." Dre? The challenge was that the location, while not technically inside the restricted zone, was extremely close to the boundary and in a remote area with no road access. Any investigation would require coordination with federal authorities and permission to access land that bordered classified military property. Carol, energized by the first real hope in 25 years, pushed hard. She contacted her congressional representative, filed Freedom of Information requests, and gave interviews to local news stations about the satellite findings. The story gained traction quickly. "Satellite images may finally solve 1999 disappearance near Area 51 became a viral headline. The pressure from renewed public interest, combined with the specific nature of Kevin's findings, finally prompted action. In February 2025, the Bureau of Land Management, working with the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, organized an expedition to the coordinates Kevin had identified. The team included sheriff's deputies, a forensic specialist, Robert Hendricks, Carol Jennings, and Kevin Tran, who had taken vacation time to be present. They traveled by four-wheel drive vehicles as far as the terrain allowed, then hiked the remaining distance in the cold desert morning. The location was utterly remote, miles from any recognizable landmark, surrounded by rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation. When they reached the coordinates, what they found seemed impossible at first glance. The rectangular shadow Kevin had identified was cast by a partially collapsed entrance to what appeared to be an underground chamber or tunnel. The entrance was barely visible, camouflaged by decades of sand and rock accumulation, but the collapse of part of the roof structure had created the shadow by forming a slight depression. Most remarkably, the edges of the entrance showed clear evidence of concrete reinforcement, weathered but unmistakable. This wasn't a natural cave or an old mining shaft. This was a constructed entrance to something built deliberately and then apparently abandoned. "This is military," Hendricks said quietly, examining the concrete. "Look at the construction style. This is 1950s or 60s military engineering." The forensic specialist used a portable ground-penetrating radar unit to scan below the surface. The readings showed a large underground space, possibly a room or series of rooms, approximately 15 feet below the surface. There also appeared to be debris or objects inside. A careful excavation began immediately. Working slowly to preserve any potential evidence, the team cleared away rock and sand from the partially collapsed entrance. By late afternoon, they'd created an opening large enough to peer inside with lights. What they saw made Carol Jennings break down, sobbing. Inside the underground chamber, illuminated by powerful LED lights, were the unmistakable remains of two human bodies. They lay on the concrete floor of what appeared to be an abandoned military storage facility, surrounded by rusted equipment and empty metal shelves. Even after 25 years, certain items were identifiable, the tattered remains of a leather jacket similar to the one Marcus wore in every photograph, a corroded camera that might have been Jake's, and scattered around the bodies, papers and notebooks, their contents long since destroyed by moisture and time. The recovery operation took 3 days. Every item was carefully documented and removed. The bodies were transported to the Clark County Coroner's Office in Las Vegas for examination and identification. The underground facility itself was documented and photographed extensively. It turned out to be a Cold War-era storage bunker, built in the early 1960s as part of the massive expansion of Area 51 and the surrounding military infrastructure. According to declassified documents that were quickly pulled after the discovery, the bunker had been used briefly for storing equipment and supplies, then abandoned sometime in the late 1960s when more secure facilities were built deeper inside the restricted zone. The entrance had been sealed with a concrete cap, but over decades, desert erosion and the natural settling of the ground had created cracks and eventually a weakness in the structure. According to the Forensic Analysis and Structural Engineering Assessment, sometime in mid-July 1999, the concrete cap had given way, possibly due to the brothers walking over it or near it, creating a sudden collapse that sent Jake and Marcus Brennan plummeting 15 feet into the abandoned bunker below. DNA analysis confirmed what everyone already knew. The bodies were Jake and Marcus Brennan. The forensic pathologist report provided the painful details. Both brothers had suffered significant injuries from the fall, broken bones, internal injuries, but these wounds were not immediately fatal. They had survived the initial fall, trapped in the dark underground chamber, with no way to climb out and no one knowing where they were. Evidence suggested they'd lived for several days in the bunker. They'd apparently tried multiple methods to escape, leaving marks on the walls where they'd attempted to climb. Jake's notebook, though badly damaged, had a few legible entries written in those final days. The words that could be recovered were heartbreaking. Marcus hurt bad, tried to make him comfortable. No one coming. Mom, I'm so sorry. The brothers had died of their injuries and dehydration together in the dark, probably within a week of their disappearance. After they died, the partial collapse that had trapped them had sealed itself shut again with falling debris, leaving only the rectangular depression that 25 years later would finally show up in a satellite image with sufficient resolution to be noticed. Carol Jennings held a memorial service in March 2025, 26 years after her nephews disappeared and 8 years after her sister died. Jake and Marcus were buried next to their mother in a Las Vegas cemetery. The service was attended by dozens of people, including the now elderly searchers who had looked for the brothers in 1999, Kevin Tran, Robert Hendricks, and representatives from the sheriff's office. "My sister never gave up," Carol said in her eulogy. "She spent 18 years looking for her sons, and she never stopped believing that someday we'd know the truth. I just wish she'd lived to see this day, to know that Jake and Marcus didn't suffer for long, that they weren't murdered or kidnapped, that they were together at the end. She deserved to know that her boys were finally coming home." The discovery prompted a review of similar abandoned Cold War-era structures on federal land, with the Bureau of Land Management working to identify and either secure or clearly mark dozens of forgotten bunkers and facilities that pose similar risks. The Brennan case became a catalyst for better documentation and management of decommissioned military infrastructure in remote areas. Kevin Tran attended the memorial service, still somewhat overwhelmed by his accidental role in solving a quarter-century-old mystery. He'd been doing routine work, looking at desert erosion patterns, when he'd stumbled across a shadow that would finally bring closure to a family's decades of anguish. He'd since learned that satellite imaging technology was increasingly being used to revisit cold cases and locate missing persons in remote areas, and he'd started volunteering his expertise to organizations that assisted families searching for lost loved ones. The story of the Brennan brothers served as a reminder of how many mysteries remain unsolved, not because of sinister cover-ups or elaborate conspiracies, but because of tragic accidents in remote places where no one thinks to look. It also demonstrated how technology continues to evolve, how images captured years ago can be re-examined with new tools and reveal details that were always there but simply couldn't be seen before. Linda Brennan's website remains online, now updated with the truth she sought for so long. Visitors can read about Jake and Marcus, see their photographs, learn about their disappearance and eventual discovery. At the top of the page, Carol added a final message from her sister, one of the video recordings Linda had made during her illness. In the video, Linda looks tired but determined. "If you're watching this, maybe you found them," she says to the camera. "Maybe you know what happened. I want you to know that I don't blame anyone. Accidents happen and the desert is dangerous. I just want my boys home. I want them to rest in peace, next to their father, next to me eventually. I want them to know they were loved every single day they were gone, that I never stopped looking, that I never stopped believing I'd find them. If you helped bring them home, thank you. Thank you from a mother who can finally rest." 26 years after Jake and Marcus Brennan walked into the Nevada desert and disappeared, they had finally come home. Their story, kept alive by their mother's unwavering dedication and ultimately solved by a shadow in a satellite image, had reached its conclusion. It wasn't the ending anyone had hoped for, but it was an ending nonetheless. And sometimes that's all a grieving family can ask for. The desert keeps many secrets buried beneath its harsh and beautiful surface. Some may never be found. But occasionally, through persistence, technology, or simple chance, those secrets emerge into the light, bringing answers to questions that have haunted families for decades. The Brennan brothers' story is one of those rare cases where the desert finally gave up what it had hidden for so long, allowing a family to grieve, to heal, and finally, to say goodbye. The weeks following the memorial service brought an unexpected wave of attention to the Brennan case. News outlets across the country picked up the story, fascinated by the intersection of Cold War history, satellite technology, and a mother's relentless search for her missing sons. Carol Jennings found herself giving interviews, something she'd never imagined doing, but she felt she owed it to Linda's memory to tell the complete story. During one of these interviews with a documentary filmmaker named James Kowalski, Carol mentioned something that had been bothering her since the discovery. When they found the boys' truck back in 1999, everything was there. Their wallets, their camping gear, everything except Jake's research notes. He always carried a field notebook with him for geological observations, but it wasn't in the truck. This detail stuck with Kowalski, who had spent years investigating Cold War-era military sites. After the interview, he reached out to Robert Hendricks, asking if he could review the evidence recovered from the bunker. Among the items catalogued by the sheriff's office were several deteriorated notebooks, their pages mostly illegible. But Hendricks remembered that modern forensic document analysis could sometimes recover writing from damaged paper using specialized imaging techniques. With Carol's permission and cooperation from the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, Kowalski arranged for the notebooks to be examined by a forensic document specialist at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Dr. Rachel Montgomery had worked on recovering text from documents damaged in fires, floods, and even archaeological sites. She warned that after 25 years in a damp underground environment, the chances of recovering meaningful text were slim, but she agreed to try. The process took weeks. Dr. Montgomery used a combination of multispectral imaging, infrared photography, and digital enhancement to examine each page of Jake's notebooks. Most pages yielded nothing, the ink having faded completely or the paper having deteriorated beyond recovery. But scattered throughout the notebooks were fragments, partial sentences, and occasionally complete entries that Dr. Montgomery was able to piece together. What emerged was a portrait of Jake Brennan's final research project, the one that had led him and his brother to that remote location in the desert. Jake had been following up on a reference he'd found in a 1958 geological survey conducted before the Area 51 expansion. The survey mentioned anomalous magnetic readings and possible subsurface structures of artificial origin in a region that would later become restricted military property. One recovered entry from early July 1999 read, "Dennis thinks I'm chasing ghosts, but the 1958 coordinates don't match anything in current geological databases. Either the surveyors made an error or something was built there and then deliberately erased from records. The timeline matches perfectly with the Cold War construction boom. If there are bunkers or tunnels that were built and then abandoned when they moved operations deeper into the restricted zone, they might contain equipment or documents that could be historically significant." Another fragment revealed Jake's growing excitement, found a reference in declassified documents to auxiliary storage facilities built in 1962 to 1963. 3 locations mentioned, but only 2 have known coordinates. The third matches the area from the 1958 survey. Marcus agreed to help me search for it next week. Mom's not thrilled about us camping near the boundary, but I promised we'd stay well outside the restricted zone. The most haunting entries were the ones Jake had written while trapped in the bunker. Dr. Montgomery had warned Carol before showing her these, but Carol insisted on seeing everything. The handwriting in these entries was shaky, written in near darkness with a dying flashlight, sometimes trailing off mid-sentence. "We fell through. Don't know how deep. Maybe 15 feet. Marcus hurt his leg bad, maybe broken. I think I cracked some ribs. Tried to climb out, but walls are concrete, smooth, nothing to grip. Truck is miles away. No one knows exactly where we are. Going to save flashlight batteries. Have to think." A later entry. "Third day, I think. Marcus' fever getting worse. Gave him the last of our water. Found old military rations in here, but they're from the 1960s. Not safe to eat. Keep thinking about Mom. She's going to be so worried. We were supposed to call her yesterday. Tried yelling for hours, but there's nothing out here, no one to hear. Should have told someone exactly where we were going." The final legible entry was dated July 21st, 1999, 6 days after the brothers had left Las Vegas. "Marcus passed away this morning. I held him and told him about the time we snuck out to the desert when we were kids, watched the meteor shower, thought we saw a UFO. He smiled a little. 'I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. We just wanted to find something amazing.' Tell Marcus's friends he was brave. Tell Dennis he was right. I shouldn't have chased ghosts. It's getting hard to write. Love you, Mom. Love you." Carol read these entries alone in her Phoenix home, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood her nephew's last days in detail. But mixed with the grief was a strange sense of relief. They hadn't suffered for weeks. Marcus had gone first, spared the prolonged anguish of dying slowly alone. Jake had been there for him, had comforted him, had not let him die alone in the dark. And Jake himself had thought of Linda at the end, had tried to send her a message, even knowing she might never receive it. The recovery of Jake's final entries added another dimension to the story, but it also raised questions that would never be fully answered. Why had the bunker entrance collapsed when it did? Had the concrete cap been steadily weakening for years, and the brothers' presence had simply been the final stress that caused it to give way? Or had there been recent seismic activity, a small earthquake that had cracked the structure? The geological surveys of the area from that time period showed no significant seismic events, but minor tremors often went unrecorded in remote desert regions. Robert Hendricks became somewhat obsessed with this question. In his retirement, he'd taken up the Brennan case again, not as a paid investigator, but as a personal mission. He obtained permission to visit the bunker site again in April 2025, bringing along a structural engineer named Victor Reeves, who specialized in analyzing concrete failures. What Reeves found was sobering. The concrete cap that had covered the bunker entrance had been installed in 1964, according to construction markings still visible on some of the intact sections. The concrete had been poured to a thickness of 18 inches, more than adequate to support the weight of vehicles or people walking over it. However, the installation had been rushed, completed as part of the rapid decommissioning of several auxiliary facilities when Area 51's operations were consolidated into more secure locations. The problem was in the reinforcement. The concrete had been poured over a wooden frame that was supposed to be temporary, used only to create the cap's shape before being removed. But examination of the collapsed sections showed that the wooden frame had never been fully removed. Over 35 years, the wood had slowly rotted, creating voids and weakness in the concrete structure. Additionally, rainwater had infiltrated through hairline cracks over the decades, freezing and expanding during cold desert winters, gradually widening those cracks. This was an accident waiting to happen, Reeves told Hendricks as they examined the site. It could have collapsed in 1995 or 2005 or never. The brothers were just incredibly unlucky. They walked over a trap that had been slowly forming for decades, and they happened to be there the day it finally gave way. Hendricks shared this information with Carol, who found it both comforting and disturbing. Comforting because it confirmed what everyone had believed. This was purely an accident, a tragic convergence of circumstances beyond anyone's control. Disturbing because it meant similar hazards might exist at other abandoned Cold War sites throughout the Southwest. This concern led Carol to become an unexpected advocate for what she called Linda's Law, a proposed federal regulation requiring comprehensive surveys and safety assessments of all decommissioned military installations on public lands. She testified before a congressional subcommittee in June 2025, bringing photographs of Jake and Marcus, showing Jake's recovered notebook entries, and presenting data compiled by the Bureau of Land Management, showing dozens of potentially hazardous abandoned structures similar to the bunker that had trapped her nephews. "My sister spent 18 years searching for her sons," Carol told the committee. "She died without knowing what happened to them. But if we can prevent another family from experiencing that anguish, if we can identify and secure these dangerous sites before someone else falls into a forgotten hole in the desert, then maybe some good can come from this tragedy." The legislation gained bipartisan support, propelled by the human interest angle of the Brennan story and the practical safety concerns it highlighted. By September 2025, Linda's Law had passed both houses of Congress and was signed by the President, allocating funding for a 5-year program to identify, assess, and remediate abandoned military structures on federal land. Meanwhile, Kevin Tran had continued his satellite analysis work, but now with a specific focus on locating similar Cold War-era bunkers and structures. Working with the Bureau of Land Management and using increasingly sophisticated imaging technology, he identified 17 additional abandoned bunkers or storage facilities in Nevada alone, most of them unknown or forgotten by current federal agencies. Each one was assessed, secured, or clearly marked to prevent future accidents. One of these discoveries, in August 2025, led to an unexpected finding. A bunker approximately 40 miles south of the one where the Brennan brothers had died was found to contain preserved documents and equipment from the early 1960s, including some materials related